Hey, in this section on margin, I wanted to bring a little something about emotions and making space, creating margin to express and process our emotions. It's something that I think we can go to two ends of the spectrum, and maybe through the last century, men, husbands have moved from one end of the spectrum to another, complete sort of suppression of and denial of, to maybe overindulging. And it's important that we find a healthy way of handling our emotions within the context of our marriage. And to start us off, I've got a little clip here from Modern Family, that series, TV show, where Jay's wife Gloria she's organised for a kind of family therapy session called, and the episode's Cleaning Out Your Junk Drawer, something like that. And Jay, who's her husband, who's the kind of patriarch of the family, doesn't really want to engage with this. So here's a little clip from Modern Family.
Sorry, I had to cut that out because this is going on YouTube, season 7, episode 8, if you want to watch it.
I think that illustrates it quite well, and it kind of goes on to see how he finds that experience actually really cathartic of expressing his emotions and kind of going there. And so last year, I was away at a conference, and it was a wonderful man speaking and teaching us on the conference. He was an American guy called Jeff Vanderstelt, and he came into Mars Hill Church. I don't know if you've heard the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast about Mark Driscoll, who was quite an abusive church leader in a sort of bullying character in many ways over time. And Jeff Vanderstelt came in after it had all blown up in this network of very large and very successful churches. And Jeff did a session with us on emotional health as church leaders, and it was really rich. Jeff told the story of his own journey, basically of not going there with his emotions at all, and his wife describing how completely emotionally shut down he was, and then kind of getting to breakdown points. And he connected with a ministry called Tin Man Ministries that really helped him. And he did this amazing session with us, which was quite extraordinary and so helpful. Jeff talked about, I think he said he knew 12 American pastors who'd taken their own lives in recent years because of breakdown, stress, and pressure. And so he was talking. The American context is a bit different to the UK context, but talking about how important it is that we deal with our emotions. We know how to handle our emotions well and appropriately. And one of the things he talks about is just naming before God each day how he's feeling, his emotions. And I don't know about you, but I go into this feeling it feels a bit wussy, feels a bit weak, but also recognizing actually this is something that's healthy. Just to bring a little bit of scripture here, Ephesians 4:26 says, in the depends which translation you look at the New Revised Standard Version, it says, "Be angry, but do not sin." I think the NIV says, "In your anger, don't sin." The point is, the Greek says, it doesn't say that you shouldn't be angry. It's about how you handle that anger. That is the key thing. Don't suppress it. Don't pretend it's not there. Don't keep it in the dark. Don't hide it. Recognize that it's there. But then I think as men, so I'm speaking particularly as a husband here, as husbands, the danger is that we handle that anger in an inappropriate way. One of them is just to suppress it and pretend it's not there. It'll probably come out in some other broken form. In another way. Another danger is that we kind of overindulge it, and we say, I'm just expressing myself. And again, that sort of overindulgence can be dangerous and destructive. And statistics are showing that, particularly since COVID, and it was really exacerbated during the lockdown times, domestic violence really went up, and it has stayed up at high. And so, speaking to men here, a danger for us is that we can have a brooding and aggression from a man can be very destructive and can very quickly undermine a marriage if our wives do not feel safe around us. There is a historical shaming put on separation and divorce, which has probably held a lot of dysfunctional marriages together over time. Again, that would be going back to that's not a new creation marriage, where a marriage stays together because of the shame of being separated or the shame of being divorced. That's not a new creation. That's an old nature coping mechanism trying to cover up sin. We're in a world now where divorce and separation isn't as shameful as it used to be. There isn't the same shunning or the same horror that happens, and rightly so. In recent years, we've seen people expressing where there's been abuse. They've been calling it out in a much more overt way right across society, whether that's leaders, politicians, people within marriages, within homes. And so now, wonderfully, we are in a place where abuse is being said in a more public way. This is not on, this should not be right. But I wanted to emphasize for us as husbands that we can't get away with, not that we ever should have been able to, we can't get away with expressing our anger, frustration, emotions relating to pain in a way that is harsh on our wives. And I'm conscious of speaking particularly to men here, but it is, Paul writes in Colossians 4:5, let your gentleness be evident to all. And he says in Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives in such a way as Christ loves the church. And how does he do that? The way that Christ loves the church is he lays down his life for us. He laid down his life for the whole world. And so speaking to you husbands, I want to encourage you, challenge you, that we need to grow into walking this mature line of not suppressing and hiding our emotions, but also not indulging them in a way that is destructive to our wife and to others around us. We need to be particularly careful of that, because men are in a position of more physical power, being physically stronger, as uncomfortable as that is to say nowadays. And so what does it look like for us to lay down our lives for our wives as husbands? I think it's about saying that my feelings are important, how I'm feeling is important, and I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. I'm going to own it before the Lord. I'm going to own it before my wife in an appropriate way, in a gentle and kind way. That I need to speak to other people first, but actually I'm going to recognise that my position in my marriage is as a servant, and actually the flourishing of my wife comes first. How I'm doing is a secondary issue. And that is the nature of a servant. The servant lays down their own priorities so as to prefer the one that they're serving. And that also, is that not what Jesus did for us in serving us, in laying down his life for us? So this, again, is part of moving into a new creation marriage. It's saying, right now I'm fuming. But more important is that I serve. So Jesus, I go to you. I bring to you my anger, my frustration, my rage, and I confess my inability to love my wife as you would, as you do. I come to you in my brokenness, ask you to change my heart, change my mind. May I be transformed by the renewing of my mind, and may I love well. Do this in me, Jesus. I cannot do it in myself. Give me a new creation marriage in this moment. Amen. And the power of the cross and the power of that transactional prayer is such that most likely you'll change. And I find often with these things, the change that happens in response to our prayers can often be quite subtle. We might, even if we're not careful, not even notice it. But we'll find that we're gently changing. And as I gave those 3 examples at the beginning of the morning, some of these things we work through over time. I mentioned there's a 10-year battle slog through an area of life for us. And Alice and I were changing iteratively over time and being moved into more freedom, more wholeness over that time period. So things don't always change immediately. And we need to have grace and we need to have perseverance when these things take a long time. But on this theme of margin, on it's important that we create space to be able to appropriately share with our spouse how we're doing. We don't just, there can be seasons of life when you just have to knuckle down and you're beasting it at work. You know, all you can do is like get up in the morning and sort of hit the pillow at the end of the day, and you've got to go through that cycle again. We can't do that for very long, but there will be some times that we do it. And let's make sure that we build in margin when we can actually share our heart. I had an example recently, just this week. I was quite hurt because I wasn't invited by someone to a significant event, and a close friend. And I was like, oh. And actually it was dominating my thinking. I was aware of this. I was like, we'd had a bit of a very strong conversation not so long ago. And I was like, have I killed our relationship? And you know, asking all these questions. And it's really in my head. And I probably wouldn't in the past have told Alice that about this stuff. I'd just sort of cracked on with it myself. But I thought actually wanting to be emotionally connected with Alice, wanting to do life together, you know, so I told Alice about how I was feeling and about how this, again, you know, the tendency in me is to feel a bit pathetic about that, to be honest. But I was like, I'm going to share this. I want to partner with Alice in life. So I did that. I told her how I was feeling, and I forgave the other person in case there was anything to forgive. I repented of anything on my part, and I think if you're doing this sort of thing with each other, the temptation can be for the person listening to feel like you've got to give some solution, and some, particularly for men probably, some sort of like, this is how you can move on from that, this is how you can solve it. But often that's not very helpful. And a tip that I was given was actually a helpful response can often just be, thank you for sharing. That's it. There's power just simply in being heard at times like this, just in being heard. Going to finish by recommending 3 resources if you want more information on this. First one is Tin Man Ministries, and this is the thing that came from that man, Jeff van der Stelt, who I mentioned. And so I've got a link to his website. You can look at that there. Second one is a really good book called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Pete Scazzero. Andrew and Rebecca, I think we were some of the first to introduce us to his stuff. It's really, really, really good. And the third one is this book here called Anatomy of the Soul. Sarah Reed recommended this to me. And this one is a bit more, it's quite technical and quite sort of a bit more academic on neuroscience. And but a really good book I recommend on sort of emotions and neuroscience and the Bible and how they all connect together. And that's a really helpful, maybe slower read, I'm finding. I'm doing a few pages a night. There we go. A little bit from me on margin and emotions.